My aunt pushed my brother into taking his own life by blaming him for our parents' deaths. When my twin brother and I were just 3 years old, my parents were taking us on a road trip but ended up getting into an accident. My parents both died on impact, but my brother and I survived despite some pretty nasty injuries. We were taken in by our aunt shortly after, and although we were just 3 years old, we could comprehend something was not right. When we were just 5 years old, my aunt told my brother and I the details of that night when our parents died, something we did not know. She specifically pointed out that her sister had died because of my brother, as our mother used her body to shield my brother from the incoming impact. In hindsight, this was not something you should say to a 5-year-old, as these words from my aunt changed the trajectory of my brother's life and severely damaged his mental health. He was an energetic kid before this despite what happened with our parents, but after my aunt put the notion in his head that our parents' death was his fault, he became a very sad kid. I remember he never came out of his shell, he didn't speak much, he refused to play with me whenever I asked him to, and he cried a lot. I remember he was just 7 years old when he broke down crying to me, asking me if he was a monster for unaliving his parents. 7-year-old me had to comfort him and tell him he did not. I tried my best, but when you're 7 you're not equipped to deal with things like this. He couldn't turn to my aunt either because she hated him. She spoiled me a lot and I became her golden child, something I really did not like. On our birthdays my presents were more lavish and I was taken to movies and for ice cream way more often. Whenever I did get something, however, I always shared it with my brother, something he really appreciated. It was due to this that despite me being the golden child of my aunt, he always loved me and appreciated me. I remember for our 12th birthday I ended up getting a video game I had wanted for a long time, on top of a new gaming console. My brother got a t-shirt and a pair of flip-flops. My aunt told me not to share my gaming console with my brother because it was mine and he might ruin it like he does with everything else, but I didn't listen to her. Whenever she slept, my brother and I had a lot of fun on that console. However, his mental health sadly never improved. By the age of 13 he started expressing suicidal thoughts to me. I made the mistake of asking my aunt to take him to therapy or counseling because it was clear my brother was not in the right headspace at all. She dismissed this, however, saying he is clearly doing this for attention. I tried everything in my power to cheer my brother up, but nothing seemed to work. He still blamed himself for the death of our parents, and my aunt making comments such as, "You know, if not for you my sister would still be here," didn't help either. I watched my brother sink into depression, and by the time he was 14 I noticed he was hurting himself. I tried to be there for him and talk to him. I tried everything a 14-year-old could do. I contacted school counselors and explained the situation, but nothing seemed to help him. I spent many nights crying silently to myself, driving myself crazy thinking of ways to help him out. The pain I felt each time I saw a new mark on his wrists or arms is indescribable. It was on our 15th birthday when things really escalated and my aunt put the final nail in my brother's coffin. My brother had been actively hurting himself for almost a year at this point and my aunt knew about it, considering she had made a few zebra jokes by this point to him. My presents were once again more expensive and more luxurious and I hated this. When my brother opened up his present my eyes dropped. His present was a book about anatomy and the human body in detail, a book which detailed which spots are most fatal when it comes to injuries, how to treat these injuries if they occur, a book clearly meant for something like a med student. My aunt knew what she was doing. She was giving my brother a book which would tell him where he would need to hurt to take his own life. I saw it by her smile, which was sly and menacing. I stayed silent and did not comment on this, however. This proved to be the biggest mistake of my life, however. About a month after the birthday I came home from school when my aunt was at work and I could smell red coming from the bathroom. I noticed my brother's bag in his room and I banged on the bathroom door. That's when I pieced the two and two together. I banged on the door over and over, shoulder barging it and kicking it until I broke it down. There I saw it. My brother in the tub. Red everywhere, with the book my aunt gave him placed on the ground. I ran over and hugged him, checking his pulse and seeing by miracle he was still breathing. I called the ambulance ASAP and held him, telling him to stay with me the whole time. The ambulance arrived and he was still alive. I rode in the ambulance with him after explaining everything to the medics. At some point throughout the drive, my brother's heart stopped. He was pronounced clinically dead, but by some miracle came back to life after 90 or so seconds. He stayed with us until we got to the hospital where he was rushed away. I'm now in the waiting room typing this as a wait event. I don't know if I made it on time. Update. My aunt ended up arriving at the hospital soon after and I absolutely exploded on her, calling her a K-year and a heartless beach. I drew the attention of everyone around me as things started seriously escalating, with my temper reaching such a point I almost swung at her before being restrained by one of the male staff. I told her to get the F out, but she screamed back at me and was the legal guardian and had a right to be there. I was told the same thing by the hospital staff despite me telling them countless times what happened and how this woman was extremely dangerous to my brother. Eventually, however, she was allowed to stay and me and her both sat in the waiting room far apart from each other and not talking. After what seemed like a lifetime, a doctor came back and told us the news. He began by saying that life is precious and we should cherish it. The fact that my brother survived is nothing short of a miracle. I ran over to hug the doctor who hugged me back. My aunt showed no emotion whatsoever, asking what's going to happen to him and asking if she could see him. The doctor explained he was going to be on and as he is in truly awful condition but he should make a steady recovery if allowed to rest for a while. The doctor then told us both the location of the room that he was in, and when he did that I knew this wouldn't end well. My aunt asked if she could visit him but was told no as he needed to rest. I desperately begged the doctors not to let her visit him, but the doctor told me there was nothing they could do as she was the legal guardian and there was no proof that she was a danger to my brother. My story was not viable enough for proof. I wanted to get mad, but I refused to do so. It didn't help that my aunt now decided to start showing emotion, breaking down and crying crocodile tears, selling a story about how much she loves my brother, which seemed to work. Even I was impressed with her acting. She is a narcissist all the way to her core. A day after, I was allowed to visit my brother and I stayed there for hours sitting on his bed and reading him books, watching shows with him and so on. When my aunt came in, I kept an eye out on what she was doing as I deemed her to be very unsafe. I promised myself that when she was in this room I would be too in order to protect my brother. Then tragedy happened. It was on the second full day in the hospital that my brother went into an unprecedented coma. The doctors and nurses freaked out and hooked him up on life support. They told us his chances are still high, however, in this coma is one he should wake up from in a few days max, which gave me some hope. I cannot lie, however, hearing this news did break me a little, and the next few days were the hardest of my life. However, it was on day 4 that things took a turn for the absolute worst. I thought my aunt had gone home as it was getting late and she left the room about 2 hours ago, and so I went up to use the bathroom. A few minutes later I came back in and was greeted with the sight of my aunt in the room. She was attempting to unplug the life support of my brother. I ran and lunged at her, managing to stop her just in time and causing commotion. I yelled out for the doctors and screamed at the top of my lungs while straddling her on the ground, and when the doctors finally came they pulled me off her. I tried to explain what happened, but she instantly went into a rant about how I attacked her unprovoked. After hearing my side, however, the doctor became extremely concerned and ordered 2 security guards to stay in the room with us. He then left. An hour later 2 police officers showed up and took both my aunt and I where we gave our statements. She tried to lie and stuck to her story, but the police officers told her they had seen the camera footage in the room which clearly showed her attempting to unplug the life support. They arrested her and took her away. That was yesterday, and my brother is still in a coma now, and my aunt seems to be currently awaiting trial. Update 2. It took another few days, and to be honest I was starting to lose hope, but my brother, being the trooper that he is, pulled through and woke up. I was the happiest person on earth when I got to hug him again. Me and him cried together and he asked me what happened. I told him he went into a coma but spared him the details of what our aunt did to him. Some time later my aunt's trial started and she was being charged with attempted unalive. I was there and I had to testify about what she did. Telling her story in front of the entire court was heartbreaking. I had to recall every event of my brother's childhood, from the death of our parents to how his aunt treated him, to everything she did which drove him to his side. I talked about the jokes she made and the favoritism she showed to me. I talked about the impact she had on my brother and how she blamed him for the death of our parents on a weekly basis. I told the court about the book she bought knowing damn well he was hurting himself routinely. I testified about how she tried to pull his plug in the hospital and how she tried to manipulate everyone into getting her way. She wanted to end his life, but she failed to do it. She tried to argue for herself, but nothing she could say came close to justifying anything she did, and the footage of her in my brother's hospital room proved decisive in deciding the case. On the night she tried to pull my brother's plug, she told me a couple of hours beforehand that she was going to be going home, and this detail proved crucial. The fact she was supposedly going home, but actually stayed at the hospital and waited for me to go use the restroom so she could try and unalive my brother, proved to the judge that her actions were premeditated. This led to her getting sentenced to 20 years with possibility of parole after 15.